This is great. Good evening. Is this mic working? Yes. Welcome to the fifth event in the 2025-2026 Seavey reading series. We've been excited about this one for a long time. I usually set the mood with a few lines from a genre that complements the author's work. For a prose reading, I read poetry. For a poetry reading, prose. However, tonight's author might read from any genre. So I've chosen a pair of lines by a poet who I believe is in the audience. Is Billy Tadros here yet? Yeah, there we go. Hi, Billy. I chose this pair of lines from a poem selected as a finalist in Frontier Poetry's open contest. The title is too long for me to read. Here they are, to set the mood. This is a love poem, which is to say that a thing becomes whatever you call it. My name is Kathryn Dent, and as the director of Susquehanna University's Writers Institute, it is my pleasure to thank students, staff, faculty, administration, alumni, friends, and donors who make tonight possible. First, students, thank you all for being here. Sienna, Ella, Bree Luby, Haley, Jasmine, Samantha, Madison, and Ayla, from book club coordination to social media enthusiasm, to filming, to serving as ushers and booksellers, your talents and personalities make it a joy to come to work every day. Staff and faculty, good people of Marcom, advancement, IT, events management, the Department of Communications, the campus bookstore, and our beloved library, we are grateful for your contributions. Tonight, I'd like to especially thank our Director of Alumni Engagement, Laura Hayden, as well as Associate Vice President of Advancement, Melissa Salazar, and community, and your efforts to sustain the Seavey reading series for years to come. My home academic department, the Department of English and Creative Writing. We thank our intrepid co-chairs, Betsy Verhoeven and Silas Zobel, and Writers Institute Program Coordinator, Tony Zitta, and all my faculty colleagues whose presence and devotion change lives. Our administration. Thank you, President Jonathan Green and First Lady Lynn Buck, for your wise counsel and leadership. And Pat Long, our Dean of the School of the Arts and School of Humanities, thank you for making us feel heard. Finally, alumni, friends, and community members. You are numerous. Rick and Susan Seavey, in absentia, thank you. Kathleen Marvin, in absentia, thank you. Billy Tadros, Caitlin Wall, Amanda Ducharme, Sue Yenchko, all alumni in the audience, welcome back. Liz Fincke, welcome back. All professors emeritus in the audience, welcome back. We look forward to reconnecting with you at the reception after the reading, where our author will be happy to sign books. And I've heard from a number of people they didn't realize there was a reception afterward, so please, everyone is invited to stay afterward. We'll really fill up that lobby. Now I get to introduce you to the witty, charming, and genre-defying Olive Lambert. Olive is a senior, double majoring in creative writing and English literature and minoring in psychology and honors. Under Carla Kelsey's tutelage, Olive has written a book-length honors poetry project called Agate in Form of Woman, to be submitted to the National Poetry Series. Also on the national stage, Olive served as a judge for the 2025 Lambda Literary Awards in the Young Adult Fiction category. They have been a staff writer for SU's satirical newspaper, The Squirrel, since their first year, and they've been treasurer for Fuse 2 years running. And much like our featured reader tonight, Olive embraces every genre under the sun. He has published creative nonfiction in Essay Magazine, winning the Eric Kirkland Prize as a sophomore. He's published both fiction and poetry in Rivercraft, winning the Juliet Gibson Prize 2 years in a row. And listen to this. Olive's poetry chapbooks have been chosen for publication by not one, not two, but 3 different small press editing and publishing classes. In 2022, Honeysuckle Moon Editions chose Olive's collection titled Things I Shouldn't Be Eating. In 2023, Gilded Lily Press selected Sonnets for Entropy. And in 2024, Spirit Box Press published The Axe Remembers. In addition, Olive has published speculative fiction and poetry in Sanctuary, travel writing in Flagship, and academic writing in Ginkgo magazine. I don't know what to call Olive's prolific output, except perhaps Finkean, or Finkesque. So with that, Olive, please come up to the stage.
Thank you, Dr. Dent. Hello, everyone. I'm Olive Lambert, and I am proud to be giving the introduction for our reader tonight. There is a famous saying, "You can't teach an old dog new tricks." But like any popular saying, it exists to be disproven. When I began my independent study with Dr. Fincke, we entered into an agreement that we would be teaching each other. Him teaching me about crafting realistic worlds and making readers care about my characters, and I teaching him about the power of science fiction and fantasy in the contemporary publishing world. He dutifully read the Isaac Asimov stories and essays I assigned to him, as well as a collection of fantasy short stories edited by Asimov, which turned out to be more geared towards children rather than adults. Dr. Fincke's thoughts as a reader outside of the genre immensely helped the construction of my novel, and his writing skills being grounded in reality stabilized mine, which tend to fly away into pure fantasy. Dr. Fincke and I are two very different writers, and that fact made our collaboration all the more productive. You learn a lot about a writer by how they edit and by how they teach. Before having read any of his work, I knew Dr. Fincke took the creation process of writing seriously, turning over a story and poking at all its angles, sharpening sentences, and burning away any unnecessary lingering in places the story didn't need to be. But we'll come back to that. First, I need to set the stage of the expansive career of the writer we have with us today. Born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Gary Fincke is a writer of poetry, fiction, and nonfiction. He earned his BA from Thiel College, his MA from Miami University, and his PhD from Kent State University. Dr. Fincke's vast collection of work has won numerous awards, including the Flannery O'Connor Prize for short fiction, the Robert C. Jones Prize for nonfiction, and the Wheeler Prize for poetry. His work has been reprinted in Best American Essays, Harper's, Best Small Fictions, and the Pushcart Prize anthologies 10 and 25. Most notably, Dr. Fincke founded the Writers Institute in 1993, which he went on to direct for over 2 decades, and created our nationally recognized creative writing program shortly after in 1996. Presently, Dr. Fincke is still quite busy. He is a co-editor for the Best Microfiction Anthology and released multiple collections of poems and essays in 2025, which he will be reading from for us tonight. His next collection of selected stories, The Comfort of Taboos, will be released this summer. When talking about a writer with such a repertoire as Gary Fincke, there is simultaneously so much to say and also nothing that hasn't already been said before. One can talk about the way he captures a single moment in his pieces, elongating it to reveal every nuance to the curves and divergences. One can talk about the strong location his pieces have in family, in his hometown, in the intersection between places we are and places we have once been. One can talk about the essayistic nature of his poetry and the poetic flow of his prose. One can talk about the way he brings to life the feeling of searching for something you know you will never quite understand, yet trying anyway. One can certainly talk, but perhaps it is best to listen for yourself. Please welcome to the stage Dr. Gary Fincke.
Missing a psalm. Had the boy, such a smart 6-year-old, not unlocked the door and walked away, had his mother not been bedridden by fever in their upstairs rented rooms, had the boy for half an hour not bounced a rubber ball off a vacant building, had his aunt not arrived to nurse her sister and noticed at once his absence, had the boy by this time not been thirsty, had his mother not begun to cry, had the boy not asked for a glass of ice water at a nearby store, had the man who sold ice cream not shouted, buy something or leave? Had the boy's mother not said, where on earth could he have gone to? Had he not meandered to the A&P to drink from its ice-cold fountain? Had his aunt not walked fruitlessly to each room's windows? Had a creek and railroad tracks not been near the grocery? Had the boy not followed them past the mill to the river? Had his aunt, after an hour, not called the police? Had she not been told to give the boy longer to show up? Had the boy for 15 minutes not tossed stones into the reeking water? Had the boy's mother not read him his father's letters from the war? Had another boy a year before not drowned in that creek? Had the boy not retraced his steps from railroad tie to railroad tie? Had those letters not taught the boy loneliness? Had another boy a month before not fallen under a train? Had those letters from far away not stopped? Had another boy the week before not been abducted and killed? Had his mother not feared for the boy's life? Had the boy not imagined being missing in action like his father? Had his aunt not sat sentry for news? Had a man not waved and asked the boy where he lived? Had the boy, eager for praise, not perfectly repeated his address? Had the man not walked beside him along the tracks? Had the tracks not paralleled the creek in a flourish of undergrowth? Had the creek not dipped into a narrow, shrouded valley? Had his mother not listened with diminishing hope for a door to open? Had a man not been fishing in the shadows? Had she not imagined a future of bloodhounds? Had the fisherman not decided those two were not father and son? Had he not called and scrambled up the weed-choked bank? Had the friendly man not run? Had the fisherman not refused the small boy's lead? Had the boy's aunt not kept sitting sentry at the top of the stairs? Had an alley not led to the house with upstairs rented rooms? Had there not been a bell that rang when the boy entered like a customer? Had his aunt not cursed, mistaking the stranger for a man with second thoughts? Had that man not said he was a father, too, of boys who were small? Had the boy's mother not appeared swaying beside his aunt? Had she not caught her balance? Had she not quietly beckoned? Had she not embraced him? Had she not offered a choice between pizza and hot dogs? Had she not poured him a glass of ice-cold water? Had she not kissed his cheeks? Had she not promised ice cream in a showcase of flavors? Thank you all for coming. This is great. I'm going to read, I suppose, 10, 11 poems, and then a couple of very brief essays so that you know what's coming, because those are the two books that they have here this evening. They were both, it's a selected poems, so it's from like 15 different books. That one actually is from the most recent book that's included, and the other book is a new and selected essays. I'm going to start, I guess not exactly start, but I'm going to go on with a poem from pretty far back. And I'm going to do this because I'm going to pair up these two poems. And one was written very, very shortly after my mother's death many, many years ago, now almost 40. And the other one was written months later. And I think you'll see the difference in immediacy in imagery. The first is called The Double Negatives of the Living. After the pastor spoke well, after he opened our root with syntax and grammar correct as his manner, I could follow my mother to her grave and lapse into the double negatives of the living. I could talk 2 hours past midnight with my father in the steelworker idiom of his city, hearing the fried mush of morning, the white Sunday silence, the many tongues of the cross, speaking dialect stories of the holy mill. I could catch his punctuation by breath, born in the thick ash of evening, overhear the end stops in his coughs, the accidental case for the thrift store's stock, the body swift tumors, the chance of modifiers for the factory uncles, the fat baking aunts, the grandmothers in the pews of their dead husbands or rocking on porches flush with the brutal streets. And finally, the commas for steel, rivers, bridges, bars, and Christ, the expletive, and all of the language of the land that we leave and return to, reopening the earth and stammering like the past twin speech, what we know by repeating what runs on without us. So this is followed by a poem that comes from an experience a couple months later when I went back to visit my father. And there's a kind of story about this because I'd written it and it was about to be published. And my father wasn't a reader, and so he would have no idea. But in this case, I felt like I ought to let him know and handed it to him. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do if he said, my God, no. But it turns out that he fell in love with this poem, so much so that he memorized it. There's 31 lines, and he would recite it when I visited. And then eventually my sister had it calligraphied and framed, and it was hung in the living room, and it became like this talking piece, and she still has it in her house, as a matter of fact. It's called Naming the Sky. There's my sky, my father says. I don't know what he expects. Answer in his driveway, it's clear, all right. And idling in neutral, think he's planning to tell me the ancient names for the dots or the tales they fathered. People who suffered, changed, and ascended while somebody handed their stories down. Two dippers and Orion. I forget the rest or never learned or failed to see anything but the stars scattered on our scale of pulse and breath. I want him to show me archer, bear, lion. I want marble busts of myth to form above us like pillars of flame, chariots of fire, accounting for every light. And because my mother has died, wonder if he means to show me where she is, how one cluster has reformed to suggest a melodrama of hope. Heavy-headed with travel, I wait while the time-release light, set to 11, blinks off in his living room like stars near the horizon, tumbling off the sky screen. And I remember no clock in this house is correct. All sixth, set so fast, no one would believe them. Early as wet robins in today's false thaw of February. We stand with the night in our lungs. We breathe a sentence of silence until he says, Venus and Jupiter directs me low in the sky where I see so many lights I can nod, certain they are among them. I asked Olive to include Pittsburgh in her intro to help me set place because about 4 or 5 of these are quite obviously set where I grew up and who I grew up among. It was still very much a steelworkers town, and we lived right outside of Pittsburgh. And he had a bakery in that mill town, about a long block from the mill itself, which was really sort of the heartbeat of that particular town. town's called Etna, in case anybody's knows the area. So here's one more coming out of that kind of experience. My story about this one was read by Garrison Keillor on NPR. And I joked about this today. And all of a sudden at the last minute, I called wherever you call in order to get in touch with Mr. Keillor, because you never get him. And I said, I want to let him know how to pronounce my name. Too late. So I just, so I tuned in, and it's gonna happen. And so, he said, The Sorrows. He has that voice, that radio voice, The Sorrows by Gary Fincke. And there it is. You have to do something with that C in there. The Sorrows. Whatever the Sunday, the Sorrows kept the women in the kitchen, my cousins and their mothers, my grandmother, her sister, all of them foraging through the nerves for pain. They sighed and rustled, and one would name her sorrows to cue sympathies, murmurs, the first offerings of possible cures. 3 eggs for chills and fever, the benefits of mint and pepper, bone set, sage, and crocus tea. Nothing they needed came over the counter or through prescriptions, not bearing a promise from God, who blessed the home remedies handed down from the lost villages of Germany, for the aunt with dizzy spells, for the uncle with the steady pain of private swelling, for past blood, for discharge, and the sweet streak from the shoulder. In the pantry, among pickled beets and stewed tomatoes, the dark honeyed liquids, the vinegar and molasses sipped from tablespoons for sorrows so regular they spoke of them as laundry to be smoothed by the great iron of faith, which sets creases worthy of paradise. And there, when only a hum came clear, they might have been speaking from clouds like the dead. But what mattered when the room went dark was the voices reaching into the lamp-lit living room of men who listened then, watching the doorway and nodding at the nostrums offered by the tongues of the unseen, as if the sorrows were soothed by the lost dialect of the soul, which whispered to the enormous ache of the imminent. Not all poems have to be quite that serious, I guess, or perhaps bleak. So this one comes out pretty much from the same place, except it's my, I guess, self-deprecating poem. And I know in the Writers Institute House, they have those posters from the Penn State series. They're in the men's room and the women's room. You guys who are current students, right? They're in there in somebody's poem. Anyway, this was, I think, the very first series of Penn State poems, and we got to drive up to State College and go to the Joe Paterno Library and a whole bunch of things going on. This was the poem that was chosen for a poster. It's called Ants. In 1952, at a family picnic, my aunt warned me not to sleep on the grass. She said ants would crawl up my nose and told the story of a woman she knew with an anthill in her forehead, how she'd slept outside and unknowing woken with ants in her sinuses. I was ready to start second grade, old enough you'd think to disbelieve something. But I brushed myself off. I listened to the rest of that victim's problems, her operation to clear a colony of ants that had settled on a kind of satellite, accepting those tunnels as home. I stared down and saw how the grass teemed, how there were nightmares of ants that would explore, my head and approve. My uncle sat down to cards. My aunt started to make that grove look like we'd never been there. And I kept walking and brushing myself like someone half-trained at putting out fire, refusing to drop and roll, but not running like a cindered fool. And this one, by design, began because in fact, my friend and colleague and golf partner is in the audience tonight, and I should just thank him for it, because when you talk and socialize on the way to the golf course, he was in the business school, so I'm not going to blame all of us in the liberal arts, but he told me a story about a student who somehow or another was convinced that many, many, many books were written by a writer by the name of Ibid. So no matter where he went for his information, there at the bottom of the page was Ibid. And for those of you, I don't even know if you use Ibid anymore, but anyway, I couldn't resist. And in fact, while we were riding in the car, I said, that's either a poem or a story, guaranteed. So according to Ibid, one student wrote, dutifully acknowledging his frequent, reliable source, whose name suggested an old Roman Empire philosopher, so prolific he must have been busy 24/7. Good Lord, this fellow Ibid must have scratched out 100 books by the looks of it, volumes everywhere, and so varied, what his mother pronounced a Renaissance man. All those long hours in libraries building reputation until a myriad of pronouncements could be safely attributed to him. When he had time, he'd Google Ibid, but there must be a million hits for someone he'd cited in English and history, in sociology and art. Ibid, so wise he fortified every thesis. What's more, he learned that even Ibid had second thoughts, research rushing over him like floodwater until he constructed a safe new raft of evidence so huge that whole papers could be a paraphrase of Ibid. So famous now, he was known by only one name, like Bono and Sting, Madonna and Prince, or any of those Brazilian soccer players who have been reverently cited as if their shirts were emblazoned with the signatures of gods. Okay. And now that you laughed, I can make you sad again. Okay. I decided to read the poem that, this has the title of the book in it, The Necessary Going On. It's called Assessing the Dead. When Gettysburg's dead, years buried, were unearthed for removal to national cemeteries, someone was hired to separate Union from Confederate, relying at first upon jacket color. He made certain the loyal were rewarded. My sister twice has studied photographs to perfect display, learning which necklace our mother wore with her blue Sunday-only lace-trimmed dress, how exactly our father's awards were arranged for ceremony when he put on his scoutmaster's uniform, placing those reframed portraits alongside both coffins like mirrors or proof of love. For the difficult cases, uniform color unknown, the grave shifter was taught to recognize the brand names of shoes and the quality of underwear to mark bones qualified for respected graves. And now we've learned elephants investigate the bones of their dead by smell and touch, using the tips of their trunks to caress what's left. And yes, sometimes the young can identify their parents lingering longer to inspect, or we like to imagine, reflect. And whether saddened or comforted by the ordeal of recollection, they examine the contours of the whitened skull, which is how reverie begins, then how it ends in turning away the necessary going on. I have one more of these culture things. Maybe some of you know this. I think probably what I want to do is say something about writing about the commonplace and then seeing what lies within something that's quite ordinary and try to make something out of it, try to discover what you really think about it. And this is all about deli meats, but not the deli meats that I buy, for sure. The deli meats my father and mother bought that I learned to live with, I guess. And you'll see their names. Those of you that know all these things, the name of the poem is Head Cheese, Liverwurst, a List of Loaves. Our refrigerator open to liverwurst, head cheese, a list of loaves, luncheon and luxury, olive, old-fashioned, and the great alliteration of peppered and pimento. We eat, my father said, 100 million cans a year, justifying our spam. 3 per second, he figured, and we sat for sandwiches he cooked because I refused them cold. You just don't know what's good, he said. And I agreed, refusing altogether potted meat food product, looking it up lately to find tripe, suet, beef hearts, memorized the mystery of partially defatted beef fatty tissue to tell my father, who's laid out cold cuts of celebration for his restored heart, shaking his head at snouts and stomachs, all the meat byproducts I can recall, while we spread mustard or mayonnaise, add pickles and onions to the short stack of squares and circles between thick rye with seeds. And I listened to my father repeat, "This is eating," before our first bites, smiling while we swallow extenders and gelatins, relish the joy of fat and spice. You can probably tell my father had triple bypass when he was about, but this was after. But he actually ate very, very healthy, except for this stuff. And this, I mentioned this afternoon. Somebody asked about the development of the program, and one of the things that at the beginning was when a visiting writer series started with one visitor per year for, I think my budget was $200. And in fact, I remember since this person, his name was Len Roberts, is a poet. He became my first writer friend. We happened to both read together at Bucknell and hit it off. And my father had a bakery. His father drove a bakery truck. I played basketball in college and mostly from the bench. He played basketball in college much more often than I did. And neither one of us had really written until we were about 30 years old. And so at this time we were in our late 30s. And so I asked him to come because I figured he would come for $200 and all the beer he could drink and stay over in my house. That was the deal. In fact, back in those days, the students could come and drink at your house too, which was probably a terrible idea, actually. But we lived really close to campus then, not where we do now. But Len died young, at least from my point of view, at 60. as it turns out. This is really an elegy. It's called Specificity. There's an epigraph. Cause of death unknown, had never been fatally ill before, from a death certificate from the 19th century. Until I was 12, worn out in God's will were the reasons my relatives died. My mother speaking like a doctor, citing visual evidence or unknowable matters of faith as if each were a diagnosis of disease. In the King James edition of medicine, the self-help my grandmother relied on, there was the finality of dropsy, the chronic palsies, what Jesus cured, like leprosy and possession, the devil embedded in the flesh like ticks. Before she was born, people died from convulsions and fever, from infancy, age, and tisic, the collective name for killers that came with coughs, as frequent as smallpox and grip of the guts, what the dying did at last when their digestion failed. Approximation, guesswork, less of that now, the X-ray showing the shadow that will kill us, the blood sample spilling numbers that count us out, each tremor specific, 1,000 names exactly right, pinpointing each particular way to die. Amyloidosis, for instance, how one friend this week has gone, and now, after memorial, after an hour of tributes by poets who traveled hours to eulogize, I sit with my wife, who orders a glass of Chambord for a small, expensive pleasure in a well-decorated room, the possibility of happiness surprising us in the way hummingbirds do, stuck in the air just now outside this window, attracted to the joy of sweetness despite the clear foreshadowing of their tiny, sprinting hearts. Okay. This is the shortest poem I'm going to read, in case anybody's counting lines. I have to, every time I do any sort of reading where I get a chance to be the only person, and my wife is along, I read one of the love poems I've written for, I'm going to read the short one tonight, and you can decide if you want to receive this poem. But anyway, we'll see. How to discover how you feel by writing. It's my lesson to everybody who's enrolled in the program. Really, this is what it's all about. Calculations, a love poem. The billionth digit of pi is 9. The last month without a full moon, February 1865. This morning, I am making a list of the last lines of parables about the work of numbers, about calculations, marking the speed with which blood travels, as if 3 feet per second were like the blessings on the late workers in a vineyard or a son just home from living with swine. Someone continues the division that computes the decimals of pi. He is telling a story, numerals spilling out toward infinity, the counting a language, a life beyond this one, as difficult to believe as the number of hours we've slept together, darkness returning and vanishing, the moments nightly between your breaths, the hesitations in your deep sleep, my own held breath, listening, and then temporarily relieved, turning toward the window, reciting the autonomic lesson of your lungs that swell and shrink at last in rhythm, their vital capacity in liters 3.1. How are we doing? Okay. think I'm right on schedule. What I'm gonna do here as the last poem is read you one poem. It's not in those books. A poem that's written recently. It is about to be published in a magazine. And what I hope it's going to be is the first poem in the next collection of new poems. And I'm trying to convince myself at my age that this is still all possible somehow. This poem is called Salvation. Just often enough, somebody comes back from certain death, prompting us to believe we might be the fortunate who go on like my friend thrown clear of his Thunderbird that exploded on impact. Or my own escape, skidding into a four-wheel drift across a low median in both lanes of oncoming rush hour freeway traffic, unscathed, upright. To some, miraculous. The reason first given for surviving a free fall 10,000 feet to a swamp of 12 stories to a sturdy awning, or the long, irregular trajectory of a plane suffering a blown hatch door, a pilot ferrying a full manifest of ghosts back to the ordinary task of living. One chance in 1,000, the pilot said, when he spoke about trying to keep that plane alive, throttling up, betting on the long odds of improvisation while it banked left and dove, drawn sideways and down by its open wound. If I land this damn thing, he'd acknowledge, was the first phrase of his hurried promise that ended with all the rest of my life. By then, he had started the full-time labor of recognizing how, soon after those first breathless minutes of surviving, he would never again be as skillful. That he became as sad as he imagined a just retired athlete to be. His gratitude so brief and shallow, he understood these were the early days of the lengthy sentence of discontent. Long ago, my sister, when she was 3, climbed through an open bedroom window onto the porch roof, a drop on that side of 20 feet to brick-paved angle alley. Like a revivalist, my mother always told that story in a way that made me listen like a congregation. You were nursing, she would begin. I held you as I watched your father creep. Be still, he kept saying. I'm coming to get you. It was impossible, her walking in the gutter, and yet it held, and she obeyed, and your father crawled inch by slanted inch into a miracle. She retold that story because she believed it defined her, as if how much her heart could take had been tested, as if it were a tall building that has to handle the speed and angle of wind that threatens height, its extended permanence explained by an engineer using close to instability when the crisis was just avoided collapse. One Sunday, leaving New York, my wife and I stopped speaking. Our refusal from anger and then from pride stretched until Tuesdays, planes as bombs, resurrected our speech to seek the sound of each other. The first hour talking and talking, new to each other again, anxious about the exact location of our daughter, the lower Manhattan child I'd wanted to slap before we'd left for declaring me selfish and ranking it the least of my sins, as if she numbered my faults on a spreadsheet. Your father saved all of us, my mother insisted, and surely our daughter did, becoming anonymous among the living, leaving me time to hurry down the stairs of forgiveness and embrace the surprise of how sometimes the chosen, including those we love, are saved without our help, untangling themselves from whatever ruins that shift and steady, then open for now into an extraordinary pocket of light. two essays. One is pretty short, and the other one is very, very short. Trying to pick something that I think is accessible in a way. I write essays in a straightforward fashion, mostly narrative, and I often write essays that are, I think the current term is braided essays, meaning they're very highly associative, and so there are multiple threads going on. Once upon a time when I first worked here, a former president said he admired the way I could keep many balls in the air on my job. And I think maybe he was onto something. He didn't say anything about how well I was handling those balls, but they didn't hit the ground. But this I decided to read this because I knew there would be some people from the community here. And it's a very early essay for me, and it's also about a local story. And so it gives me a chance for a 30-second lesson on this, and that is, if we were talking in nonfiction writing class, we would talk about developing a second subject. You find out what the essay is really about, because everybody else can follow along on that the surface story. And so this pretty much serves as an example, I hope. And I'm not sure I think I'll just pass on explaining this situation. Those of you who know it will see, and the rest can, I think, pick this one up. It's called After Arson. The soft thud above me might have been the cat, but I knew it was my son placing the barbells on the carpet. Those workouts sustained Derek's faith in growth. He understood heredity, and he was frustrated by the disparity between our bodies. I reminded him about favorable odds and time. He finished 3 sets and started down the steps to check for results in a mirror by the side door. When he saw I was watching, he turned his back to the glass. "No more wimp," he said. "I'll ring the bell this summer when the carnival comes to the Rotary Field." I told him there was a secret to the carnival's test of strength, that the game he'd asked me to try 3 summers in a row was rigged. "The wire that the weight's on is slack," I said. "No matter how hard you swing the hammer, the weight won't rise all the way to the top." Derek shook his head and recounted the number of bells rung by older boys and fathers unlike me who were willing to test themselves. "The carnival guy always takes the slack out for a swing or two," I explained. "He makes sure somebody rings the bell occasionally, or else nobody else will play after a while." Derek thought for a second. "You're just embarrassed," he finally replied. At the end of one of those nights when I returned home late, my wife was waiting for me with an expression of crisis stitched onto her face. She was otherwise unmarked, so I expected to hear about my mother's heart or splints supplied to Derek or one of our other 2 children. This time I was wrong. It was Derek, but instead of a doctor, a policeman. What does a boy just turned 11 have to do to be detained for questioning? In a small town like ours, not much, but this was serious. Liz insisted. A fire in a public restroom. The near catastrophic spread of flames through a theater, or something close to that. Paper towels had been lit. They had flared, according to what Liz had been told, threatening the brittle wooden walls of the converted barn. But Derek and the theater were still standing. Nevertheless, a confrontation was waiting for me in the theater office, and I was expected to drive back across town to meet it. Derek claims, Liz said, that he had only been an accidental witness, standing in the restroom when another boy had tried to prove himself with matches. After I asked why I was needed then, Liz shrugged. When I arrived, Derek was sitting across the table from a policeman who simply nodded when I entered. I figured him at once for a tyrant. Selinsgrove Seals was printed in white block letters on the front of the red cap Derek wore. I checked off a series of hard-edged possible responses to the stupidity of what I anticipated was about to happen. Tell me what happened while your father listens, the policeman said. There were long pauses in the rehearsal, Derek explained. His part, as well as the other boys', was small, and they had time to fill. When he watched the other boy light the towels, it had seemed like a performance, something he was expected to watch. He had not even helped throw water when the towel roll opened up across the floor, flames traveling like thick thread. Even when it was over, it still seemed like the other boy's role. And Derek hadn't said anything to anybody because nothing looked to him like it was damaged. Except, I thought, now Derek was accused because he expected everyone to be truthful and didn't understand the word against word dilemma of investigation. I looked to the policeman to see how he was interpreting, but instead of saying anything, he nodded again and left the room. Sometimes I am surprised by things. Sometimes there are moments when the world is pliable enough for hope. When the policeman returned, he was pleasant and articulate. Derek was believed. The other boy had lied so badly he could do nothing eventually but confess. It's because you had a coat and tie on, Liz said when we got home. Being dressed like that at 10:30 at night impresses the police. Maybe. Derek twirled his hat on one finger, blurring the stylized blue seal below the white letters. A couple of revolutions and it flew off into the centerpiece of dried flowers. Everything is going soft on this planet, the policeman had said while Derek was retrieving his jacket. You need to keep a watchdog now just to keep from sinking into the world. We have a cat, I said, and he had looked quizzically at me. He had laughed too, although a beat was missed. The hat with the aggressive blue seal displaced the flower arrangement. He's still in the play, I said, the other boys being replaced. On such short notice, Derek reached out to pull the hat free. He began to twirl it again. It doesn't take De Niro. Somebody can learn it in a few days. This time the hat landed by my feet. I picked it up in a way that kept Derek from asking for it back. At breakfast, before his brother and sister come downstairs, Derek explained the urgency of his recurring dream. It was my fault, Liz reminded me, that he has it. He is running from the pods. All of us have changed, invaded by aliens, beginning with the remake seen more than 2 years before and ending with the original watched last month. Derek has sat through both versions of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Years before, after watching the remake, he'd gone to sleep as usual with his Darth Vader punching bag, one of those tall weighted balloons that sways and bounces and always returns to upright, standing beside his bed. An hour later, he'd woken to the certainty of an attack by the pods. A life-size one stood near his face. Am I changed? He had screamed. Am I changed? I had tried to reason with him. I had turned on the light to show him Vader's plastic face. You're pretending, he had said. You're a pod man. The real you is in the garbage. Vader had to be deflated. A nightlight had been found in a drawer. 8 years old, Liz had said, and you've given him a changeling complex. The pods had returned several times a year since then, and his horror stories when I tried to extract them broke off in him like ticks. I imagined holding some kind of medicinal flame to each of them. I imagine his watching the original film when he is 11 will show him it is time to stop worrying. Instead, I listened this time to his revelation that everyone who is not real has a tiny red mark behind his ears. After I poured the orange juice, I allowed him to check near my hairline. Every time, he said, I am the only one left who isn't changed. When I asked him what he saw behind my ears, he shrugged and returned to his cereal. That night, we watched a television program that showed clips of famous televised magic. Near the end, a magician made the Statue of Liberty disappear. The statue weighed 225 tons, we learned. Seeing an audience follow the action in person. The magician prattled on about freedom and immigrants and his mother, an enormous curtain tellingly closed behind him. I remember this one, I said, but I didn't watch. A set of commercials came on. He can't do it, Derek said. It's just a trick. After the commercials, when the curtain finally opened, the statue was gone. Searchlights played over the empty space. The live audience was astonished. And then the magician closed the curtain again and began to preach about the importance of freedom. Running on so long, I told Derek he was moving the audience, not the statue. They think they're looking at the same space, but he's turned them, I said. Now he's stalling while he turns them back. Derek leaned forward and stared. When the statue reappeared, he sat up and said, "You're wrong. It's a fake statue. He's changed it just like the body snatchers." "It's him, Dad," Derek said a few weeks later, pointing at the newspaper. "I was watching the Pittsburgh Pirate relief pitcher walk the winning run into scoring position. He placed the paper on my lap and showed me the picture on the front page. I glanced on at one of those faces you know but don't know. 'Who?' I said. 'The policeman at the playhouse.' 'Oh.' I thought of how reflexively I waved at such people, hoping a gesture was enough. A left-hander trudged into the nearly hopeless situation. The heart of the lineup would surely drive in the run that would put the Pirate losing streak at 5. He got killed," Derek said. "Somebody shot him 4 times. Around here?" For a moment, just before I picked up the newspaper and began to read, I thought of how many times someone had said this, looking around the vulnerable spots in his house, as if insulation could keep out every kind of weather. The killer, the paper said, had been seeking revenge. He had stepped out of the darkness and fired 4 times through the patrol car window. It turned out he was mistaken. The policeman he had meant to kill was sitting in another car at the beginning of the speed trap. They had switched cars. It was boring, after all, to do nothing but read numbers. 30 minutes had passed since the killer had been given a speeding ticket. Time enough to go home, load a rifle, and return. Perhaps the road 2 lanes along the river had reminded him of a frontier. There was a country and western bar a short distance away. After he fired the shots, the killer walked to it and ordered a beer and smoked a cigarette, according to a patron, by taking cowboy film drags. So the arrest had been simple. There was even an eyewitness. Parked in front of the patrol car was a pickup truck whose driver was being cited for littering. Sitting under the dome light, the policeman had been writing the citation when the avenger fired. The litterer had looked out into the face of a man who had just fired a rifle into the body of a policeman. They had stared at each other until the man on foot had crossed the road, tossed the rifle onto the seat of his Jeep, and walked off toward the tavern. Later, everyone in the bar claimed they knew he was the killer because he had been the only one who had not rushed to the door when a man shouted from outside that someone had been shot. "He didn't take no mess from nobody," a friend explained when he was interviewed. "He didn't allow nothing to fool with his head." There were short biographies of both victim and killer. There were comments from teachers and relatives. The killer's friend ran on for half a column. Bad news went down when you messed with him, he said at the close. After a spring of record rain, nothing for a week but heat, the black flies prospered. In our part of Pennsylvania, there was a characteristic fanning of the face in warm weather. A stranger riding through town would wonder at the mannerism. If he stopped to inquire, he quickly discovered its source, and either was assimilated or covered by welts. For 15 minutes, I had been brushing the gnats away and watching the lot in front of the college auditorium filled with police cars. 500 uniformed mourners had been promised, an equal number of civilians. The black flies broke into small clouds and covered the crowd. Derek walked across the grass toward me. He looked strange in long pants. School had been out for a week. His expression was equally out of place. A first funeral should be some vague great uncle who seemed to have been born old. We sat far to the side. There were perhaps a dozen people we knew there. None of them were policemen. The service was a Catholic one. Several priests stood on the stage, but only one was elaborately dressed. He would say the important things. The program, I realized, was exactly like a church service, at least until the homily, which was filled with allegories for hope and faith. Derek looked straight ahead. He might have been afraid to turn, believing someone would lecture him immediately about behavior. However, when I didn't read the responses or sing the hymns, he was silent too. When the policemen who chose to take communion filed through the aisles, all of them cupped their hands in front of them. Some lessons stay. No one was self-conscious. An hour of that prayer and praise. A large picture was mounted above the closed casket. Even from 30 rows back, I could tell it was an enlargement of the photograph in the newspaper. The priest concluded by telling the story of a little girl's fantasy of heaven. She claimed when asked that everyone had the same expression of happiness. It was that perfect smile, she said, the one that animals have in my picture books. Derek appeared to be listening closely. And then the 500 policemen exited. They were forming, I was sure, an elongated corridor of grief through which the coffin and the family would pass. Okay, last one. Again, thank you all for coming and listening so well. And this one is, I'll just mention the fact, at some point I began to write shorter and use short pieces in class. This essay appeared in an online magazine called Brevity, where all the pieces are nonfiction and are 750 words or fewer. And I used to use that and assign that, and this is what we tried to do in the first week or two of class. Write, not trying to fill up pages, trying to get something said, basically in 3 pages or fewer. And it's also an essay not only in Brevity, but somehow or another ended up in the Texas High School English anthology, which, who knows, but I actually got royalties. Enough, I don't know, maybe for 3 large pizzas with everything on them, something like that. I think it was like $75 each time, each year or something like that. So somebody in Texas, classes of sophomores, I was told. But I'll end with this. It's called Crosswords. My mother loved crossword puzzles, spending hours sometimes until she managed to work out the answers to clues like bright-colored aquarium fish and English composer Frederick. Donio, she'd finally fill in, and Delius. And for a day or two, she'd leave the large Sunday newspaper puzzle face up on the end table by the couch like a trophy. But she refused to do the crosswords in puzzle books, not because they were too hard or too easy, but because the solutions were printed in the back of those books. Anyone seeing her filled-in puzzles would never be certain she hadn't peeked. The puzzles, according to her, were cheapened by those filled-in grids because, she said, you never know if somebody cheated. Because those answers were there, anyone could work the puzzles in those books, my mother insisted, even the ones marked expert. All they had to do was flip to the back and sneak a quick look. And it didn't matter if they only glanced at one word in the upper right-hand corner, covering the answers with their hand and inching down to reveal just that one word. Nothing was satisfying after that. If they're out there, I've never seen a puzzle book with no answers in the back. But I thought of my mother as I sat on a plane last week working the crossword in the United Airlines magazine. That magazine has the solution printed on another page. Cheating so accessible, I knew that my mother would rather sink into boredom or anxiety than do that crossword. Of course, it would have been a different story if she believed the next passenger could open to the flawlessly completed puzzle and discover that the solution wasn't printed elsewhere in the magazine. She would have begun the puzzle at once if there could be belief that she'd managed every letter exactly in ink, without a cross-out or an overstrike, as if she could solve it perfectly letter by letter. Suddenly, I admit, I wanted to tear out the answer page before I began, stuff it into the wrapper for the tiny pretzels that come with the complimentary drink. And I didn't want to make one error as I worked that puzzle in ink. There I was, my mother's son, carrying on her attitude as if it were securely lodged in my DNA. Someone might sensibly point out that without the answers, I'd never know if my solution was correct. My response, I'd know because the letters all intersected perfectly. Even the final clue that asked for an archaic spelling. And if I became stuck with 2 or 3 letters unfilled, I'd keep that puzzle in front of me, still believing until the seatbelt sign went off at the gate that the improbable variant spelling might come to me. My mother sometimes opened a dictionary to words beginning with P-L, combing through pages to discover a 7-letter word for which she had only those 2 beginning letters. In the dictionary by my computer, there are 12 pages of words beginning with P-L. What joy she must have had finding the word 8 pages in at P-L-O after fruitlessly reading through the P-L-A's, the P-L-E's, and the P-L-I's. It was a way of living. You fill in every space without being able to verify your answers. Like a variation on faith. If you could check, what was the point of the struggle? If the answers were available, life was cheapened. And the day after she died, 20 years ago now, there was a newspaper folded to the crossword puzzle lying face up on the end table by the couch. I knew before I checked that it was the puzzle from the day before, one she completed, filling in every last letter for certain before the solution arrived the following day. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. I'm going to take a few more minutes of your time before we move to the reception. We've been working on a project since last spring to help support the Seavey reading series and to celebrate Gary's founding of the Writers Institute, his mentorship of writers, as well as his broader contributions across the campus, including his years coaching and his involvement in extracurricular life. Some of you may not know that Gary and his wife Liz have funded a senior portfolio prize judged every year by a creative writing alum. $1,000 goes to help launch the career of a graduating senior each year. So many stories of their generosity include, I'm going on 17 years teaching at Susquehanna University, and I've been to countless events, like he alluded to tonight, hosted at their house on Melody Lane. In retirement, he has ongoing independent studies with students, including Olive, Lorraine Durbin, Colleen Huding, to mention a few recent students, for which he basically refuses to get paid. He keeps in touch with people who are here tonight: Roxanne and Julie, Billy, Caitlin, Chris and Abrielle, Amanda, Theo, Sarah, Melissa, Maria, Haley, and so many more whose names I don't know or whom I didn't see yet. So tonight I'm happy to announce the launch of the Gary Fincke Visiting Author Fund. This project honors Gary's deep commitment to bringing visiting writers to campus. Posters on the walls of the Writers Institute highlight the literary superstars he's brought to campus, starting back in 1981. Okay, they came for $200. They don't come so cheap anymore. It's gone by different names over the years, but Gary started the whole thing, this author series that we now call the Seavey Reading Series. This fund's purpose is to support a visiting author within the Seavey Reading Series in Gary's name. It reflects a community desire by faculty, alumni, and former students to honor Gary in a meaningful and lasting way. His reading tonight and the cumulative Seavey Reading Series events with Q&A sessions, dinners with authors, manuscript reviews, introductions by students, these play a tremendous role in shaping student experience and creative community here at SU. Gary has always been deeply committed in bringing working writers into our community. He believed this direct engagement transformed students. This fund ensures that we can continue that tradition. Alumni who studied with or were coached by Gary often share how he influenced their writing, discipline, and confidence. This fund continues that spirit of mentorship. In the near term, the fund will support individual author visits, and our long-term vision is to endow the fund so that the Susquehanna University community will benefit permanently from Gary's legacy. Your support helps sustain experiences like this for generations of students to come. The initiative is both a tribute to Gary's legacy as writer, mentor, teacher, and coach, and an investment in future generations of students. So I'd like to close by inviting those who feel moved by Gary's impact to learn more by connecting either tonight or in the near future with Melissa Salazar from Advancement, who's here tonight. Additional information about the initiative will be shared following this event, so now I look forward to joining with you in the lobby in celebration of our mentor and friend, Gary Fincke. Thank you again, Gary.